Have you ever had the police called on you just for locking your own gate? Not for causing trouble, not for breaking the law, but because someone wanted to turn your land into a shared pathway. And the most terrifying part is this: that 911 call wasn't meant to resolve a problem. It was a declaration of war. If you've ever thought, how much trouble could a simple gate really cause? Then this story will make you rethink the meaning of boundaries, ownership, and silence in a completely different way. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 42 years old. If you met me in real life, you probably wouldn't remember my face 5 minutes later. I'm not loud. I don't like attention. I work as a remote IT consultant, a job that involves screens far more than people. My wife, Emily, 39, works in digital marketing. She's meticulous, sharp, and always seems to see things one step ahead of me. We weren't looking for anything grand when we bought our house in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet suburb in Colorado. We just wanted peace. The house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac where cars rarely pass. Behind it is a small creek that runs year-round. Not loud, not violent, just enough to create a sound that makes your shoulders loosen automatically after a long day. Along the side of the house is a long strip of yard, stretching straight from the front fence all the way to the creek. When we first moved in, I remember thinking, this feels like a reward for years of non-stop work. Our golden retriever, Buddy, had room to run. Emily planted tomatoes, basil, and a few small vegetable beds. I placed an old wooden chair in the corner of the yard where every afternoon I could sit, doing nothing at all, just listening to the water and the wind. The first 2 years passed exactly like that. No drama, no disputes, no violation notices. Until the Hartman family moved into the house across from us. At first, everything seemed normal. Linda Hartman, the woman who ran the household, was always neatly dressed, her smile tight, her voice just loud enough to command attention. The kind of person you don't instantly dislike, but also don't feel comfortable talking to for too long. Within 6 months, Linda became the HOA President. I didn't pay much attention. To be honest, I'd never attended a single HOA meeting. To me, the HOA was like the weather. It existed, but as long as it wasn't too extreme, it wasn't worth worrying about. My first mistake was underestimating people who crave power in small spaces. Things started with very minor changes. Mailboxes had to be repainted in the approved color. Holiday decorations could only stay up for exactly 2 weeks. Trash bins couldn't be left on the curb after 5 p.m. None of these rules bothered me. I'm a rule-following person. If there's a precise regulation, I comply. Simple as that. But then, one afternoon, I heard a familiar engine growl. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's lawnmower. But the sound wasn't steady. It was fast and aggressive, accompanied by children shouting. I stepped into the backyard. A dirt bike shot straight across the side yard of my property, its rear tire flinging dirt, tearing up the grass. 2 more followed. The kids were laughing loudly as if they were riding through a public park. I stood there, frozen for a few seconds. Then Buddy ran out barking. One of the bikes swerved sharply. The distance between the tire and my dog was no more than a hand's width. Buddy yelped in pain and bolted under the porch. He didn't come back out for over an hour. That night, Emily said, "Daniel, this isn't okay." I knew she was right. The next day I went to the house across the street. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply explained what had happened. Slowly, clearly. Linda listened with her arms crossed, a thin smile on her lips. When I finished, she nodded and said, "Boys will be boys. They're just enjoying the community." I replied, "But my yard isn't a shared space." Linda tilted her head, her eyes darkening slightly. "That path has been used for years. Everyone goes through there." I knew that wasn't true. When we bought the house, I'd reviewed the survey. That land was entirely mine, stretching all the way to the creek, no easement, no public right-of-way. But I didn't argue. I simply said, I'll find a solution so no one gets hurt. Linda smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A few days later, I installed a small wooden gate, nothing towering, no barbed wire, no warning signs, just a waist-high gate made of cedar, matching the fence. I installed a simple latch. Anyone could open it if they wanted. They just couldn't charge straight through like before. When I stepped back and looked at the finished gate, I thought, that's it. That should be enough. That afternoon, Buddy ran freely around the yard. Emily smiled. I felt relieved. That feeling lasted less than a day. The next morning, I heard metal slamming violently. I looked out the window. Tyler Hartman, Linda's son, was standing in front of the gate. He was shaking it, kicking the wooden frame. Another kid was recording on his phone. I didn't go outside. I closed the window, returned to my desk, and turned my music up a little louder. What I didn't realize was that, in that moment, the invisible line between a neighborly disagreement and a power struggle had officially been erased, and that just a few days later, the police would be standing right in front of that gate. There's something I learned very early in life. When someone refuses to accept boundaries, they'll look for a way to turn you into the problem. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. 2 days after the gate was installed, that afternoon passed peacefully. Emily was watering the plants. Buddy lay stretched out on the grass, his tail giving the occasional lazy wag. I stood by the grill flipping a piece of meat, the smell of smoke mixing with the damp wood scent drifting up from the creek behind us. The atmosphere of a typical suburban neighborhood. Safe. Normal. No sign that anything was about to happen. Then I heard shouting. At first, it was an argument carried by the wind, then a sharp, high-pitched voice deliberately loud. I turned my head and saw Tyler Hartman standing on the other side of the gate, his phone pressed tight to his ear. 2 friends stood behind him, their expressions a mix of excitement and anticipation. The kind of look kids have when they believe they're doing something big. I caught fragments of words. Blocked, can't get through, public path. Emily stopped what she was doing and looked at me. She didn't ask anything. She didn't have to. 10 minutes later, the familiar sound of police sirens tore through the quiet of the cul-de-sac. 2 patrol cars stopped directly in front of our house. Red and blue lights reflected off the wooden fence, the windows, the gate, the very thing that just hours earlier had been an ordinary part of the backyard. A younger officer stepped out first, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the area for signs of danger. Behind him came an older officer, slower in his movements, with the weary expression of someone long accustomed to unnecessary calls. Linda Hartman appeared almost immediately. She strode quickly across the lawn, her posture firm, her voice loud and clear. "Thank God you're here, officers." The way she said it wasn't a plea for help. It sounded like a declaration. She pointed straight at me. "This man illegally blocked a public access path. My son and his friends are trapped." The word trapped was emphasized heavily. Emily stood close beside me. Quietly, she turned on the camera on her phone. She didn't say a word. She just held it steady. I knew it was instinct, and I knew that later on, that instinct would save us. I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm. "Officer, this is my private property. I installed a small gate because kids were riding dirt bikes through my yard." Tyler stood behind his mother, his face flushed, breathing hard as if he'd just endured a major ordeal. One of the 2 friends was filming. The older officer didn't react right away. He walked slowly toward the gate. He looked at it from the outside. Then he stepped over to my side and looked at it from the inside. He said nothing. He raised his hand, reached over the top of the gate, and flicked the latch with one finger. Click. The gate swung open easily. A silence fell, long enough for everyone to hear the sound of water flowing behind my house. The officer turned to Tyler. "Kid, this is how gates work." Tyler blinked. "So, we're not trapped?" The officer looked him straight in the eye. "If you were trapped, you wouldn't be filming." The younger officer turned his head away, struggling not to laugh. Linda stood there, her face shifting from white to red, then to a purplish shade that was hard to name. She repeated herself, her tone sharper now. "This is a public path." I pointed down at the grass where the parallel lines from my lawnmower were still clearly visible. A public path with my mower lines? The older officer sighed. "Ma'am, sidewalks are public. Backyards are private." He turned to Tyler, his voice lowering. "Calling 911 for this is a misuse of emergency services. Don't do it again." The matter ended faster than I expected, but as the two officers walked back to their car, the older one glanced back at me. His expression was no longer light. He said quietly enough that only I could hear, "This might be over for us. But for you, I don't think so." Before I could ask what he meant, he closed the car door. The red and blue lights shut off, the cars drove away. Linda said nothing more. She turned her back, grabbed Tyler by the arm, and walked home with stiff, rigid steps. The neighborhood slowly returned to quiet, but it wasn't a comforting quiet. It felt like the silence before a storm. A week passed with nothing happening, no dirt bikes, no violation letters, no provocation. Linda collected her mail every morning, shot our house a cold glance, then looked away. I hoped, naively, that being corrected by the police in front of neighbors might make her stop. Emily wasn't as optimistic. She said, "People like that don't stop, they change tactics." That Tuesday, a white envelope sat in our mailbox. The HOA logo was printed clearly on the front. Inside was a violation notice. Unauthorized structure. Fine, $50. That unauthorized structure was the gate. I felt a wave of heat rise in my chest, but it quickly gave way to something colder, sharper. Emily read every line carefully, then looked at me. "They're not trying to fix anything. They're trying to break us." That night, we sat down at the kitchen table. No TV, no background music, just the warm yellow light and the thin sheet of paper between us. I opened my laptop and downloaded the HOA bylaws. 150 pages. Boring, dry, full of legal terminology. I read every single line. Emily made coffee, then tea, then coffee again. On page 87, section 9B, fences and gates are permitted on side yards. I read it out loud. My gate was the correct material, the correct height, the correct appearance. Completely compliant. I wrote a polite letter, cited the clause, and sent it by certified mail to the HOA. I thought, that's it. 2 weeks later, the response arrived. Appeal denied. Fine doubled. Late fee added. That was when I understood one obvious truth. That 911 call wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the opening shot. And my gate had just become the first target. Some battles don't begin with gunfire. They begin with paperwork. After my appeal was denied, everything moved at a frighteningly slow pace. No noise, no direct threats, just thin sheets of paper, small numbers, cold lines of text appearing with mechanical regularity, like the heartbeat of a machine. In the first week, I received 2 more violation notices. One was for substandard lawn maintenance. The reason? A patch of grass near the curb was higher than allowed, by 1/4 of an inch. The notice even included a long-distance photo with a red circle precisely marking that spot, as if someone had stood there for a long time, just waiting for the grass to grow that tiny bit taller. The second notice was for the trash bin. I left it at the curb until 6 p.m. The rule said 5 p.m. Emily finished reading and let out a soft laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd she didn't know how else to react. "Daniel," she said, "they're testing our tolerance." She was right. In the days that followed, I started noticing details I'd never paid attention to before. A golf cart moving slowly past our house, close to 10 p.m. 2 figures stop in front of the gate, flashlight beams sweeping across the fence, the windows, the lawn. For the first time, Emily said to me, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" I did. And it wasn't a pleasant feeling. Not outright fear, but a vague tension, like someone was always standing just behind you, disappearing the moment you turned around. One night, Emily pulled up the Ring camera footage to review it. 2 figures, Linda Hartman and a member of the HOA board named Gary. They stood in front of our house longer than any other in the cul-de-sac. Their flashlights moved slowly, methodically, as if searching for the most minor possible flaw to exploit. Emily replayed the clip, then replayed it again. She didn't say anything. She just printed screenshots. That was when the proof wall truly began to take shape. At first, it was just a small corner of my home office, a simple corkboard, a few sheets of paper. But over time, it grew, spreading across the entire wall. Violation notices, HOA emails, camera screenshots, highlighted sections of the bylaws, certified mail receipts. Emily organized everything chronologically. No emotion, no judgment, just facts placed side by side. "I don't want to win by yelling," she said. "I want to win by being undeniable." Meanwhile, the fines kept coming. Not a single week passed without a new envelope. The total climbed. $200, then $350, then past $500. The letters began using heavier language: failure to comply, potential lien, legal action. One evening, I sat alone in my office, staring at the wall of evidence, and for the first time, I felt tired. Not tired of the money, but tired of the feeling of being slowly crushed, bit, by a system designed to wear you down. I thought about taking the gate down. Just remove it, and everything might stop. That thought lasted exactly a few seconds. Then I remembered Linda's eyes the day the police came. Not the eyes of someone misunderstood, but someone's eyes are being blocked. If I took down the gate, she would win, and next time, it would be something else. Emily seemed to read my thoughts. She placed her hand on my shoulder. "You're not wrong for wanting peace, but if we back down, they'll learn a very dangerous lesson." Right then, Finley, the older neighbor who lived 2 houses down, stopped by. He was old school, retired, liked his lawn cut in straight lines, and absolutely hated the HOA. He looked at the wall and whistled. "Oh, she's running the old playbook again." I turned to him. "What do you mean?" Finley lowered his voice. "A few years back, she did this to the Millers. Fined them over their front door color not being harmonious. Kept fining them until they sold the house." Emily asked, "Didn't anyone object?" Finley gave a tired smile. "People get exhausted and scared. She counts on that." Before he left, Finley said something I've never forgotten. "If she's watching you at night, you'd better learn how to see clearly in daylight." A few nights later, close to 10 p.m., Emily was reviewing the cameras as usual. Suddenly, she jumped to her feet. "Daniel, it's not just flashlights. I stepped over. On the screen, hovering just above the back fence, was a small object. 4 rotors, a blinking red light. A drone. It wasn't passing by. It was hovering. Its camera rotated slowly, sweeping over the gate, the patio, the glass doors. I felt a surge of anger, fast and hot like fire. This was no longer about the HOA. This was trespassing. I moved toward the back door. Emily grabbed my hand tightly. "Don't. If you break it, you'll be the one in the wrong." I stopped. We stood there, watching the drone for another 2 minutes before it climbed higher and disappeared behind the trees. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear, but out of a very different feeling. Violation. Our backyard, our private space, turned into something to be monitored. The next morning, Emily had already started researching. FAA regulations, state privacy laws, rules about filming on fenced property. She took notes, highlighted, printed documents. "Daniel," she said, her voice eerily calm, "if they're using the law to pressure us, then we'll use the law to make them stop." That evening, we prepared. Camera, tripod, flight tracking app, a logbook for timestamps. We didn't know then that the drone was only the surface of something much bigger. But I felt one thing with absolute clarity. The game had leveled up. And from this point on, no one was pretending this was just a neighbor dispute anymore. There is a skinny line between being watched and being hunted. The night the drone appeared, that line was erased. The next morning I woke with the familiar feeling of high-stress days, a heavy head, a stiff neck, and a thought looping in my mind like a clock hand jammed in its gears. I stood by the window looking out at the backyard. Sunlight fell across the grass, the creek still murmured, and everything looked peaceful to the point of feeling artificial. Emily had been up early. She was sitting at the dining table, her laptop open, surrounded by printed pages dense with text. When I walked in, she looked up, her eyes unusually alert. "I reviewed all the footage," she said. "Not just last night, the entire week." She turned the screen toward me. A timeline appeared, carefully marked with timestamps, hours, minutes, seconds. Each marker led to a short clip, flashlights sweeping across the fence, a golf cart stopping in front of the house, and then long gaps. Those gaps were what made my blood run cold. "Do you see it?" Emily pointed to a marker. "They stop here 3 times longer than at the other houses." There was no need to speculate. The numbers spoke for themselves. We agreed on a new rule. No emotional reactions, no arguments, no anonymous letters, no provocation of any kind. Just observe, record, and let the truth accumulate enough weight. That evening, we prepared as if for a long overnight shift. Emily set the DSLR on a tripod and aimed it at the backyard. I opened a flight tracking app a pilot friend had once recommended. A notebook lay ready on the table, a pen clipped to its edge. Shortly after dusk, the drone appeared again. It flew in quietly, almost silently. The red light blinked slowly. It stopped at the same spot as before, a few meters from the fence, holding a steady altitude. The camera rotated, slow, deliberate, as if inspecting an obstacle that needed to be handled. Emily pressed the shutter. The soft click repeated at regular intervals. I logged the start time, estimated altitude, and wind direction. Everything unfolded in silence. Then, for a brief moment, the last light of day reflected off the drone's body. Emily held the frame and took a few more shots. When she zoomed in, I could clearly see a small string of characters printed on the landing gear. "Got it," she said softly. We repeated that process for 3 consecutive nights. No gaps, no rushing. By the 4th night, we had a complete data set. Images, timestamps, positions, and Most importantly, identifying marks. The next day, we didn't call Linda. We didn't email the HOA. We did the only thing left once everything had crossed beyond neighborhood boundaries. We went official. Reports were filed, complaints submitted, receipts saved. Emily placed them on the proof wall, right next to the drone photos. No emotional notes, just case numbers. The effect came faster than I expected. The drone disappeared. Not that night. Not the next, not the one after that, but the fines kept coming. Smaller infractions, harsher language. Threats of liens and legal proceedings are increasingly common. If the goal was to wear us down, they were on the right track. Until Finley stopped by with a plate of still warm cookies. He set the plate down and lowered his voice as if he were sharing a secret. Heard Tyler showing off a new drone at the park. Says it's top tier, can see insects from far away. Emily and I looked at each other. No words needed. That evening, a new section appeared on the proof wall. The drone photos were printed larger. Copies of the reports were pinned neatly. The data points were connected with thin lines of string. The wall no longer looked like a notice board. It looked like an engine diagram, every component fitting together, just waiting to reveal the power source driving it. The only question left was, why? Why was a small gate worth so much effort? Why call the police, issue petty fines, sweep with flashlights, deploy a drone? It didn't make sense. It wasn't proportional. Emily began digging deeper, this time not through cameras but public records. She pulled old meeting minutes. A vague line about a Creekside landscape improvement project appeared repeatedly. She followed that thread to the county planning site. Then they filed information requests. Waited and waited. A week passed. 2 weeks. Then one afternoon, as I was adjusting the gate hinges, Emily called me into the office. Her voice wasn't loud, but there was something different about it. "Daniel," she said, "I think I know why." On the screen was a chain of emails. The sender is a senior executive at a real estate development company. The recipient, the HOA's official email address. Emily opened an attachment. A drawing appeared. Thick red lines traced a route from a proposed bridge over the creek, through common land, then cut straight down into the cul-de-sac, through our yard. I leaned closer, my heart pounded. The map showed an access corridor, as if it had always been a public pathway. But I knew, and Emily knew, that was false. The survey at purchase confirmed our boundary extended all the way to the water's edge. No corridor, no exception. Emily opened more emails. The language was careful, indirect, but clear enough. A quiet arrangement. A community improvement fund is to be directed to the HOA. A consulting fee for those who would facilitate the process. A chill ran down my spine. Everything suddenly lined up. The fixation on the gate, the 911 call meant to establish a public access precedent, the campaign of petty fines to grind us down, the drone flights to document obstructions. The gate wasn't the problem. It was the obstacle. "This isn't just bullying," I said. "This is fraud." Emily had already printed the emails. She laminated the map and pinned it to the center of the proof wall. A red pin marked the exact location of our yard. We did nothing else that night. No calls, no messages, no warnings. We chose silence. Because when your opponent thinks they're winning, they keep going. And with every step forward, they leave footprints. 2 days later, a red envelope appeared in the mailbox. An ultimatum. 48 hours. If the gate hadn't been removed, the HOA would have initiated legal action. I checked the weather forecast. A significant storm was expected on Saturday. High winds, heavy rain, thunder, power outages, likely. Emily looked at me. No words needed. We both understood. The final act was approaching. We checked the cameras, replaced batteries, added a small trail cam inside the birdhouse aimed directly at the gate. Everything was ready. No display, no theatrics. Night fell. Dark clouds rolled in. The wind picked up. Through the howling gusts, I understood one thing clearly. The silence before a storm is never empty. It's just waiting for the moment to break. And when it does, there's no going back. There are nights when you can feel that everything is about to cross a line. Not logically, but through something far more primal, profound in your chest. That Saturday night was one of them. By late afternoon, the sky had already darkened. The clouds hung low and heavy over the entire neighborhood. The wind came in short, powerful bursts, bending the trees along the creek, their leaves scraping against each other with a dry, unsettling sound. The weather forecast was correct. A major storm was moving in. Emily and I didn't turn on the TV. We didn't play music. The house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. We didn't talk much. Everything that needed to be prepared had already been prepared. Cameras at every angle, the Ring doorbell, the corner-mounted cameras, and the small trail cam hidden inside the birdhouse aimed directly at the gate. Fully charged batteries, empty memory cards. 11:58 p.m. The wind howled through the cracks. Rain grew heavier, pounding the roof like handfuls of gravel. The lights inside the house flickered once, then steadied. 12:07 a.m. Nothing. 12:11 a.m. Emily glanced down at the tablet. A soft ping sounded. Motion detected. She didn't say a word. She simply turned the screen toward me. On the infrared feed, two figures in black hoodies appeared at the edge of the frame. They were crouched low, moving quickly but clumsily through the rain. Even through the grainy image, I recognized the familiar build immediately. Tyler Hartman, and one of his friends. The friend hung back, constantly scanning the area, clearly acting as a lookout. Tyler knelt in front of the gate. He opened his backpack. The security light reflected off something long and metallic. In that moment, everything inside me froze. Bolt cutters. This was no longer a prank. No longer boys will be boys. This was trespassing. Deliberate. With tools. Emily turned to me, her voice astonishingly calm. Call 911. Say someone is trying to break the gate. Speak. Slowly. Clearly. I picked up the phone. My fingers trembled slightly, but my voice didn't. When I ended the call, Tyler was struggling to position the cutter's jaws around the gate latch. His hands slipped in the rain, metal grinding against metal with a harsh, jarring sound. Part of me wanted to rush outside immediately, to shout, to end this right then. But I remembered Emily's words. And I remembered the cameras. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The rain hit my face like a wall. The wind was so intense I had to hunch forward to keep my balance. The ground beneath my feet was slick with mud, every step uncertain. They didn't hear me approach. The wind and rain swallowed every other sound. I stopped a few meters away. "Stay away from my gate!" I shouted, my voice torn apart by the wind. Tyler spun around. In the flickering light, I saw his face clearly. Not fear, not remorse, but anger. The anger of someone who feels challenged. "You can't own nature," he shouted back. It sounded almost idealistic. If he hadn't been standing on my property, holding bolt cutters. "Then let nature pay the fines," I replied coldly. His friend whispered urgently, "Dude, cops." In that instant, Tyler lunged. I didn't have time to react. The shove to my chest was more complicated than I expected. My foot slipped in the mud. I lost my balance. My heel caught on a paving stone I hadn't fixed yet. The world tilted. I fell backward. My back and head slammed into the wet ground. The pain didn't come sharply at first, just a stunned sensation, as if someone had switched off the lights in my head for a few seconds. The air was forced from my lungs. Cold rain soaked through my clothes, into my skin. In that moment, I was helpless. And right then, the sky exploded with light. Red and blue flashed through the rain. Police sirens tore through the stormy night. Tyler dropped the cutters. The sound of metal hitting the ground was sharp and chilling. Both boys turned and ran, sprinting across the lawn, disappearing between the dark houses. Car doors flew open. 2 figures rushed toward me. I recognized them immediately. The same 2 officers from the first 911 call. They looked at me lying in the mud, my clothes soaked, looked at the gate, looked at the bolt cutters. And before I could say a single word, another voice rang out, high-pitched and shrill, cutting through even the rain.
"He attacked my son!"
Linda Hartman. She came running from her house, hastily throwing on a coat, hair disheveled, her face pale, but her eyes frighteningly alert.
"I saw everything!"
she screamed.
"He ambushed my boy!"
The younger officer looked at me, suspicion in his eyes. From his perspective, the scene was simple. A grown man on the ground, 2 teenagers fleeing, and a screaming mother. The truth at that moment was fragile. I tried to sit up. My head was spinning. My mouth tasted of mud. And for the first time in months, I felt something very close to despair. Maybe this was how she won, not through the law, but by flipping the story. "Officer," Emily said, stepping out onto the porch. She wasn't running. She wasn't shouting. She walked slowly, steadily, holding the tablet. The screen glowed in the rain. "You need to see this," she said, her voice remarkably clear. "And so do you." She tapped the screen. The video played. Infrared footage from the trail cam. Tyler and his friend sneaking up to the gate. The bolt cutters. I'm stepping outside. I'm keeping my distance. Tyler charging. The shove. I'm falling. Linda stammered. "That video is fake. It's edited." Emily didn't respond. She swiped left. A second video. A higher angle from Finley's house across the street. Clearer, a full view. Then a third video from another neighbor's phone. Shaky footage, but the audio was crystal clear. "Get away from my gate!" Tyler's profanity, the impact, the sound of me hitting the ground. 3 videos, 3 angles, 3 independent sources. 1 truth. The rain kept falling. The police lights kept flashing. But in that moment, every bit of power Linda thought she had collapsed. The older officer turned to his partner. "Go find those kids. Now." Then he looked at me. "Mr. Brooks, do you want to press charges?" I looked at Linda. There were no tears in her eyes now, only raw hatred. "Yes," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "Trespassing, vandalism, assault." That stormy night, everything ended. But I knew with absolute certainty, this wasn't the end. This was the moment the truth began. To fight back. The morning after the storm, the neighborhood looked like it was waking up from a nightmare. Broken branches lay scattered across the sidewalks. Wet leaves were plastered to the pavement. The air was heavy with the smell of soil and rainwater. Everything was eerily quiet, as if everyone was trying to pretend that the night before had never happened. I woke with a dull ache at the back of my head and along my back. Nothing severe, but enough to remind me that it was real. Emily brewed coffee, set a mug in front of me, then sat down across the table. We didn't speak for a few minutes. We didn't need to. The night before had already said everything. My phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "Daniel, it's Finley. Police just brought the Hartman kid home. The whole neighborhood is buzzing. If you need anything, knock." I looked at Emily. She gave a slight nod. "This won't end on its own," she said. "But the balance has shifted." Around noon, the older police officer called me. His voice was deep and tired, but the doubt was gone. "We've completed the full report," he said. "The 2 juveniles are being processed through the juvenile system. The bolt cutters were seized as evidence. Mrs. Emily's videos were very compelling." He paused, then added, "You should brace yourself. Mrs. Hartman won't stop." The call ended, leaving me with a strange feeling. Not fear, but clarity, as if I finally understood the rules of the game I'd been dragged into. That afternoon, Emily stood in front of the proof wall for a long time. The wall was now almost completely covered. There was barely any space left to pin new documents without rearranging everything. "We can't just defend anymore," she said. "If we only react, they'll always be one step ahead." I knew exactly what she was thinking. Linda had lost face. Her son was now dealing with the juvenile court. But she still had one thing left: her position. And with that position, she still had the power to make life difficult. "We need to do the opposite," I said. "Do not avoid the rules. Use the rules themselves." Emily smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who had just seen the path forward. Among the dozens of HOA regulations, Linda particularly loved using one clause to intimidate people: the noise regulation. It was so vague it could apply to almost anyone at any time. 55 decibels after 10 p.m. But in practice, it was enforced only when Linda wanted it to be. Emily opened her notebook. Neatly written lines appeared. "Linda and Gary patrol every week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, around 10 to 10:30 p.m. in Gary's golf cart." That cart was anything but quiet. "What do you think?" Emily said slowly. "If this time we're the ones who file the complaint?" The idea was so simple, I laughed. Not out loud, just a short, dry laugh. "Trap them with their own rules," I said. The first step was equipment. I ordered a professional decibel meter, the same type used by city code enforcement. It wasn't cheap, but I treated it as an investment in long-term peace. When it arrived, I spent the entire afternoon reading the manual, calibrating it, and testing it. I measured rain, a hairdryer, cars passing on the street. I wanted to be certain that when the time came, the numbers would be indisputable. Tuesday night, 9:45 p.m. Emily was upstairs in the office, camera set up, zoomed toward the street. The display clearly showed the time. I was in the garage, door cracked open, standing in the shadows. The decibel meter is in my hand. Finley, an unlikely but enthusiastic ally, stood across the street, pretending to take out his recycling bin, phone already raised. 10:17 p.m. I heard it before I saw it. A sputtering, grinding sound like a lawnmower choking. Gary's golf cart appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac. Linda sat beside him, back straight, arms crossed, a flashlight. The beam swept across the yards. As the cart approached my house, I raised the meter. The needle jumped, 60 dB, 65, then spiked to 72. I held my position, no movement, no words. Emily whispered through the earpiece, "Crystal clear." Finley spoke loudly into his phone, excitement barely contained. "Logged it, 10:17 p.m., 72 decibels, over the limit." The golf cart rolled past slowly, as if they had no idea that this time they were the ones being measured. The next morning, I drafted the most comprehensive complaint the HOA had ever received. Time, location, decibel level, clause citations, video from 3 angles, a notarized statement verifying equipment accuracy, and most importantly, I sent copies to every member of the HOA board without going through Linda. No one could block it. That week's HOA meeting was different. Linda sat at the head of the table, but for the first time, she didn't say much. Gary was flushed, head down. The evidence was undeniable. The result? Violation confirmed. Fine imposed. Not large, but symbolic. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started talking. At the mailbox, at the curb, on front lawns. She violated rules too? So it wasn't just me getting fined? Maybe we weren't wrong. Fear began to retreat, making room for courage. That evening, Emily stood in front of the proof wall and pinned a new sheet right at the center. Precedent. We proved something, she said. She's not above the rules. I looked at the wall, then out at the gate in the yard. It was still there, solid, silent. So, what's next? I asked. Emily turned to me, her gaze steady. Not just protecting ourselves anymore, but ending this. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. The storm was gone, but I knew another shock was coming. Not from the sky, but from people. There's something strange about fear. When it exists only within individuals, it makes people bow their heads. But once it's spoken out loud, it begins to dissolve. After the noise violation, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates changed in a way that was hard to describe. There were no outbursts, no protests, just different looks, more extended conversations by the mailboxes, slow, discreet nods filled with unspoken meaning. People began to recognize a simple truth they had long avoided. Linda Hartman was not untouchable. Emily sensed it first. She was always attuned to small movements, subtle shifts in human behavior. One afternoon, while we were watering the plants in front of the house, a young woman stopped at the curb. I only learned her name later, Sarah. She stood there for a moment, gripping the strap of her handbag as if weighing something difficult to say. Then she took a deep breath. "You're Daniel, right?" I nodded. She glanced around, then spoke quickly, her voice slightly shaky. "Mrs. Hartman fined me $200 because of my daughter's birthday balloons. She said the colors weren't compliant." Emily stopped watering and turned to her. "I paid it," Sarah continued. "I was tired. I didn't want trouble, but that stormy night, I recorded everything on my phone. I just didn't think I'd ever need it." Emily gave a very slight smile. "Thank you for not deleting it." That night, Sarah sent the video. It wasn't new footage. It was a missing piece. The proof wall expanded once more, not just with documents, but with stories. Sarah's story. Finley's story. The stories of people who had never spoken up. We didn't go door to door. We didn't campaign. We simply listened. And when people know someone is listening, they start to talk. A middle-aged man talked about being fined for his children's excessive laughter in the pool. An elderly couple was ordered to replace their front door because the color was visually disruptive. A newly moved-in family was repeatedly fined in their first month, to the point that they had considered selling their home. Each story was a small cut. Together, they formed a long crack. Emily printed a simple sheet of paper. No logo, no slogan, just one clear heading. Request for special HOA meeting, review of abuse of power, and vote of no confidence in the current president. According to the bylaws, only signatures from 10% of households were required. Finley signed first. He signed big and firm, then laughed. This should have happened a long time ago. Sarah signed next, then another person, then another. We placed the form on the kitchen table. Every afternoon it gained a few more signatures. Some people signed quickly and left. Some stayed to tell their stories. Some sighed, as if finally setting down a burden they'd carried for too long. In less than 48 hours, we had signatures from nearly a third of the HOA neighborhood. Emily submitted the request by the book, quietly, without advance notice. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at the clubhouse. That evening, I walked into a room where I had never before seen more than 10 attendees. This time, there were over 100. The air was thick, not with explosive anger, but with something heavier, anticipation. Linda sat at the head table with Gary and another loyal board member beside her. Her makeup was carefully done, but it couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. Emily and I connected the laptop to the projector. Linda tried to open the procedure. Long-winded, tedious, an attempt to wear people down. I stood up, my voice calm. Point of order. She frowned. Objection. I cited the exact clause, not a word extra. The secretary nodded. Mr. Brooks is correct. A soft chuckle rippled from the back of the room. Then silence. When it was my turn to present, I didn't tell the story with emotion. I told it in sequence. 1. Started with the gate. A photo appeared on the screen. A small, simple wooden gate, fully compliant. I immediately displayed the HOA clause that allowed it. No argument, no interpretation. Then I showed the violation notices, one by one. Date, time, reason, amount. The room began to murmur, not in surprise, but in recognition. Emily continued, projecting late-night footage. Linda and Gary shining flashlights in front of our house. Then the drone images. Then the FAA records. Then the police report. No one spoke. When the storm night video played, the room fell into complete silence. The sound of rain, the shouting, the shove. I hit the ground. Someone gasped. Someone covered their mouth. I paused for a beat, then spoke slowly. For months, we asked ourselves, why? Emily clicked to the next slide. The developer's map appeared. A red line cut straight through my yard. Then the emails. The words, Community Improvement Fund, consulting fee. The room erupted. What is this? She used HOA money for that? That's private property, Linda shot to her feet. It was a preliminary discussion. Nothing was finalized. I looked directly at her. But you acted as if it already belonged to you. 3 motions were put forward. Refund all improper fines. Issue a formal censure for abuse of power and conflict of interest. And finally, a vote of no confidence. When the secretary read the result, 52 in favor, 48 against, the room seemed to hold its breath for a second. Then it exploded. Linda stood there, silent. She picked up her purse, turned, and walked out. No one stepped aside for her anymore. That night, when we returned home, the gate still stood quietly in the darkness. I rested my hand on it, feeling the cool wood beneath my palm. Emily stood beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't win. I understood. We were simply the first to refuse to bow. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change everything. After that HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt as if it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. The days that followed were strangely quiet. So quiet that I had to keep reminding myself that everything had truly happened. No more violation notices in the mailbox. No more golf carts creeping through the streets at night. No more flashlights sweeping across our windows. Linda Hartman disappeared from community life. She still lived across the street, but each morning she got into her car silently, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Power, the thing that once made others lower their heads, had suddenly become invisible. I thought, maybe that was it. I was wrong. A week later, another envelope appeared in the mailbox, not from the HOA, from the city. The Department of Urban Planning and Development's logo sat in the top left corner. I read every line slowly, the familiar sense of vigilance returning. Linda had escalated the fight. She had filed an official complaint with the city, claiming that my gate was a public obstruction in violation of the municipal code. By procedure, the case was required to go to mandatory mediation at City Hall. Emily finished reading and set the letter down on the table. She doesn't have the HOA anymore, she said, so she's using the government. No anger, no surprise, just final confirmation of something we had long understood. When someone is used to wielding power, they don't stop simply because they lose a title. The mediation was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, a small conference room, cold fluorescent lighting, beige walls, the kind of color that seems designed to drain emotion from the air. On the table sat a pot of lukewarm coffee and neatly stacked blank paper, as if the room itself had been built to process conflict without feeling it. Linda arrived early. She wore a dark suit, hair neatly styled, and a thick binder placed in front of her. She set it down with a deliberate thud, a familiar gesture from someone asserting dominance. Emily and I arrived shortly after, carrying a simple briefcase. The mediator was Ms. Albright, in her 50s, sharp-eyed, economical with words. The kind of person who had heard every story and had no patience left for theatrics. "Mrs. Hartman," she said, "since you filed the complaint, you may begin." Linda stood. Her voice was smooth, carefully rehearsed. She spoke of a historic pathway, of community spirit, of access to nature. She presented old faded maps from the 1970s. She explained a legal concept called a prescriptive easement. If a path is used openly for long enough, it can become a public right. She painted me as selfish, a newcomer who built barriers and took away something that belonged to the community. I watched Ms. Albright. She took notes, gave a slight nod. For a moment, a wave of doubt passed through me. Not because Linda was right, but because I understood how easily a story could be bent with words alone. Then it was my turn. I didn't open a binder. I didn't spread documents. I simply sat up straight. "Ms. Albright," I said, slowly and clearly. 3 years ago, when we purchased this home, we hired a licensed surveyor to establish the property boundaries. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. This is the official survey recorded with the county. As you can see, our property line extends all the way to the creek. There is no easement, no public access path. I paused and let the silence do its work. Until the day I installed a small gate to prevent trespassing and danger, no one, including Mrs. Hartman, had ever mentioned this so-called public path. Linda's hands tightened. I saw her jaw stiffen. I continued, my voice steady. Mrs. Hartman's complaint states that my gate is a public obstruction, that it blocks access, and that it poses a safety risk. I leaned down and opened our simple briefcase. I placed a small metal object on the table. A brand new latch, identical to the one installed on our gate. It made a sharp, unmistakable click as it touched the tabletop. Linda opened her mouth. "Objection, this is irrelevant." Ms. Albright raised a hand, her gaze cutting. "Let him continue." I rested my hand on the latch. "This," I said, is what caused Mrs. Hartman's son to call 911, because it was too complicated. I slid the latch to the right. Click. Locked. I slid it back. Clack. Unlocked. I looked directly at Ms. Albright, lowering my voice, slowing it, precisely like the officer had that day. This is how gates work. A brief silence followed. Then, very faintly, a thin smile appeared at the corner of Ms. Albright's mouth. Not amusement. Recognition. She picked up the latch and tried it herself. Locked, unlocked, then set it down. "Mrs. Hartman," she said coolly, "a gate with a latch is not a wall. It is not a public obstruction." She looked up. "This complaint has no merit." The room seemed to grow a few degrees lighter. Linda sank back into her chair. No objection, no defense. It was over. The mediation ended there. On the drive home, neither Emily nor I spoke. We drove in silence like two people who had just emerged from a storm that had lasted for months. A few days later, the new HOA refunded every improper fine. A check sat in the mailbox, an apology without words. Together with several neighbors, we rewrote the rules, rights regarding gates and fences, transparent enforcement procedures, and mandatory notice periods. Linda put her house up for sale. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. People lingered longer when greeting each other. Children drew with chalk on the sidewalks. Conversations no longer ended abruptly. One late afternoon, I stood by the gate, oiling the hinges. The creek behind the house flowed steadily, indifferent to what people had fought over. Emily brought out 2 glasses of iced tea and leaned against the gatepost. "After everything," she said softly, "it's still just a gate." I slid the latch. Click. Then opened it. Clack. "Yeah," I replied, finally smiling. "But it's our gate." The clink of glasses sounded louder than usual in the quiet garden. Some victories don't need cheers. They only need boundaries to be held. And some stories don't end when the screen goes dark. They stay to remind us that silence is a choice, and truth, when recorded, will always find its way to be heard. Some battles don't end with cheers. There's no moment of raised hands in victory, no applause. No one is standing on a podium declaring, "It's all over." They end more quietly than that. An ordinary morning, an empty mailbox, a day that passes without a single violation notice. I realized it around the second week after the mediation at City Hall. The old habit was still there. Every morning, I walked to the mailbox with that familiar edge of caution, as if my body hadn't yet accepted that the threat was truly gone. But it was gone. No white envelopes, no HOA logos, no cold, formal language, just a few local flyers and a utility bill. Emily stood by the window watching me, then smiled. She didn't say anything. She understood, too. There are some joys you don't put into words, because once you do, they might break. That afternoon, I sat in the backyard on the old wooden chair. The creek flowed steadily, its familiar sound unchanged, no matter how much turmoil the people around it had endured. Buddy lay stretched out in the sunlight, his tail tapping the grass whenever a bird swooped down nearby. It occurred to me, if none of this had happened, I probably would never have appreciated this moment quite so deeply. A few days later, the "for sale" sign appeared in front of Linda's house. No one said anything, no loud gossip, but I noticed people's eyes lingered longer than usual as they passed by. Not out of curiosity, but relief. Linda was no longer the center of the neighborhood. She became a shadow, quietly packing, avoiding everyone's gaze. No one mocked her. No one attacked her. Perhaps because everyone understood. The most painful loss isn't losing a position. It's losing the silence of others. 3 weeks later, the moving truck pulled up. I stood in the yard watching them carry boxes. Linda didn't look over. Neither did I. There was no need. The gate stood there, between two houses, no taller than yesterday, no sturdier than the day before. But to me, it now carries a different meaning. It was no longer just a physical boundary. It was memory. One late afternoon, Sarah, the neighbor who had filmed the storm the night before, stopped by. She carried a small paper bag. Inside were homemade cookies, a little misshapen, slightly burnt at the edges, but warm smelling. "Thank you," she said hesitantly. If it hadn't been for you two." Emily shook her head gently. "It wasn't because of us. It's just that you didn't stay silent." Sarah smiled, her eyes reddening slightly. Before she left, she added, "Next time, if something happens, I'll speak up." Conversations like that began to happen more often. Finley stopped by more frequently, bringing gossip and his dry jokes. A young family at the end of the cul-de-sac invited us over for dinner. People who used to exchange only nods now lingered to talk for a few extra minutes. The neighborhood didn't change architecturally, but it changed in how people looked at one another. Emily and I were invited to join a small group to revise some HOA rules, not to control, but to limit abuse of power. Clearer enforcement procedures, mandatory warnings, transparent evidence. No one wanted another Linda Hartman. What stayed with me the most wasn't the victory, but a question that kept returning. Why did it take so much pain just to protect such an ordinary boundary? I thought back to the moment when I had briefly considered taking the gate down. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the self-doubt. The nights staring at the proof wall, wondering whether I was making everything worse. Maybe a lot of people took down their gates, not because they were wrong, but because they were tired. And I understand that. Not everyone has an Emily beside them. Not everyone has a camera, the time, or the strength to document every detail. Not everyone wants their life to turn into a case file. But this story isn't meant to say that. Everyone has to fight. It's only meant to say this. If you choose not to stay silent, you are not wrong. One weekend morning, I oiled the gate hinges again. A small task, but I did it slowly. Emily sat nearby, gathering dry leaves and planting a few new basil plants. "After everything?" she asked softly. "Do you feel like you've changed?" I thought for a moment. I believe less that silence is always the solution. Emily nodded. We clinked our glasses of iced water. The sound was very soft, but in that quiet yard it rang clearer than usual. Buddy lifted his head and wagged his tail. The creek kept flowing. Somewhere a few streets away, a lawnmower started up. Life went on. Not perfect, not perfectly fair, but more honest. That evening when I closed the gate, I paused for a moment. I looked at the simple latch, the thing that had once been called a public obstruction. I slid it over. Click. The sound no longer carried tension, only certainty. Some. Stories aren't born to provoke outrage. They're born to remind us that boundaries aren't selfish, that power isn't always right, and that sometimes the bravest thing isn't to strike back, but to document, stand firm, and refuse to bow. If you're somewhere out there living a very different life, but this story resonates with you, then maybe you're standing in front of a gate of your own, and the choice it is always yours. There's something extraordinary about peace. Only when it's taken away do we realize how unconsciously we had been living inside it. After everything that happened, our lives didn't become more perfect. They simply returned to their proper rhythm. And perhaps that is what's most precious of all. No more unexpected violation letters in the mailbox. No more flashlights sweeping across the windows at night. No more feeling the need to check the clock every time we rolled the trash bin to the curb or bend down to measure individual blades of grass. As those small things disappeared, I noticed my breathing begin to slow. In the mornings, I went out to the backyard a little earlier, not to check if anything was wrong, but just to stand there, to listen to the creek, to listen to the birds, to listen to the quiet that had belonged to this place long before everything began. Emily was right. After all, it really was just a gate. But to me, that gate was no longer wood, hinges, or a latch. It had become a marker, a boundary we chose not to step back from. One afternoon, as I was oiling the hinges, a neighbor stopped at the curb. He didn't say much. He just nodded and said, "Thank you for not giving up." That sentence stayed with me all day. I thought about all the people who had once lowered their heads, not because they were weak, but because they were tired, because they had families, jobs, and worries far bigger than a fight with an HOA. I wondered whether, in a different situation, I would have had the strength to see it through myself. And I understood something significant. Not everyone needs to be the one standing at the front, but society always needs at least one person willing to say no. Not to start a war, but to reset a boundary. We didn't become neighborhood heroes. We didn't want to. We simply became more ordinary neighbors than before. People who could look others in the eye as equals, no longer avoiding, no longer afraid. When Linda sold her house and left, there was no applause, no sarcasm, just silence. But it was a very different silence than before. It was no longer heavy. It felt like a space finally returned to where it belonged. I used to think victory was the moment your opponent fell. Now I know. Real victory is when you no longer have to think about them at all. One evening, Emily asked me, "If you could go back to the beginning, would you still build the gate?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about the sleepless nights, the anger, the moments when everything felt like it was slipping out of my hands. Then I nodded. Yes. Not because I enjoy conflict, but because I understand that if I hadn't built that gate, sooner or later another gate would have appeared in my life, and the question would have been the same. Would I dare to hold on to my boundary? Some people think setting boundaries is selfish, but the truth is, without boundaries, even kindness will be exploited until it's exhausted. This story doesn't say you have to confront every injustice. It doesn't say you must fight to the end in every situation. It simply says that when you know you're right, and when silence only allows what's wrong to grow larger, speaking up is not causing trouble. It's self-respect. If you've watched this far, maybe you're thinking about something in your own life, a boundary that was crossed, a decision you kept postponing, a time you chose silence even though you knew you weren't wrong. And if that's true, then perhaps this story didn't come to you by accident. Life doesn't always give us easy choices, but it always gives us the right to choose, to stay silent, or to protect what belongs to us. If this story made you pause and think, even for a moment, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you believe that everyday stories, without heroes, without superpowers, can still change how we see life, stay with Deep Life Tales. We don't. tell stories to make you outraged. We tell them so you can recognize yourself within them. Like if this story resonated with you, comment if you've ever stood in front of a gate of your own. And subscribe, not to support us, but to walk alongside the stories still waiting to be told. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply not to step back. See you in the following story.